This is CNC World, a new perspective.
Last week, Americans observed the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. On that day in Dallas in 1963, a young local radio reporter named Pierce Allman saw the shots that killed Kennedy and even encountered the assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. Now 79 years old, Allman recounted for us what happened.
Pierce Allman was a local radio reporter in Dallas, Texas back in 1963. On November the 22nd, at around 12:20 p.m., Allman decided to walk the 4 blocks from his office to the plaza where Kennedy would be passing through, though he wasn't assigned to the story.
I had admired him tremendously. I thought he was a gifted politician. Remember, too, the President and the First Lady in the United States are the closest thing to royalty that we have. And when they're extraordinarily attractive, and when they've had so much television exposure and so much publicity, it's just sort of natural that if you haven't seen them in person, you want to go over and see them.
He recalls that about 2 blocks into the plaza, he looked up at the rooftops of the buildings but didn't see any security.
I was wondering how they secured all that, and I turned to my colleague and said, you know, if there were going to be anything like an assassination attempt, it would probably be here.
Allman stood near the intersection of the streets, facing the Texas School Book Depository, from where later investigation found the shooter pulled the trigger on Kennedy. Thousands of people were already there to welcome the president's motorcade. Finally, the president and his entourage arrived.
And when the limo came to my right, I didn't even notice John and Nellie Connolly in the jump seat. I was just struck by Jackie, who was closest to me on the left-hand side of the car. The president was on the other side. And she had this marvelous smile, a little wave. Mr. Kennedy on the other side had a different kind of wave, you know, sort of like that.
But shortly after the limo turned onto the Elm Street, the first gunshot rang out.
That's a sound you never forget. I didn't register it at first as a shot. Mm-hmm. It didn't sound exactly like a rifle shot. It had more of a boom. It was a loud sound. But I thought, you know, unconsciously you think that's not a shot, not in my hometown. And the feeling was that it was maybe a firecracker or maybe a backfire. But I glanced up, and on the 5th floor of the depository building, there was a window, double window, open, and 3 guys were hanging out of the window, and they were looking up at the 6th floor window. And I glanced up momentarily, but by then the car had gone on, and it was the second shot.
There were roughly 2 seconds between the first 2 shots, and a third shot came right after.
Mm-hmm. And on the second shot, Kennedy didn't have a violent reaction. He sort of, it was almost like a twitch or almost like a flinch when he went to his left, probably about 40 feet.
And the third shot was a dead hit.
Kennedy was toppling to his left. Jackie was screaming, and she got out of her seat and stepped on the back seat. Was actually trying to reach across the back of the vehicle. It looked like she was trying to help Hill get in, and that's not so. And then it was erroneously reported that she was trying to get out of the car, and that's not so. And what we found out later was that she was trying to retrieve a piece of skull from her husband, which I found out later she did.
The limo paused momentarily after the third shot and then took off.
The entire time sequence from the turning of the limo onto Elm, and by the time it left the triple underpass, maybe 20 seconds. Mm-hmm. The shots themselves were less than 8 seconds, less than 7 seconds. Mm-hmm. It is so unexpected and so sudden and so violent and so shocking that you sort of separate. Intellectually, you watch what's happening.
Allman says his professional instinct as a journalist kicked in shortly after an initial moment of fluster.
And my instinct was, I've got to get to a phone. The press bus was way back. There was no portable equipment in those days. There were no smartphones. The transistor radio had just been invented. And if you didn't have a phone, you were out of luck. So I thought, okay, the nearest phone is going to be in that building.
Allman rushed to the door of the depository building.
The steps to the depository building, and there was a guy standing in the doorway when I went in, and I identified myself and said, "Where's the phone?"
Allman rushed to the only phone in the lobby, called his station, and became one of the first media representatives to send his historic news to the world. He stayed at the building for around 30 minutes until the police arrived and cordoned off the area. But it wasn't until 3 weeks later that Allman realized the man he met at the doorway of the depository building was Oswald.
When the Secret Service called about 3 weeks later, they said, "We want to visit, want to interview you." I said, "Fine." And they came in and they wanted to know where I was standing. They wanted to know how many shots. How many shots? 3. And they wanted to know the sequence, and then what did I do? Where did I run? What did I say? And then they said, "Well, let's talk about the guy in the doorway at the depository." And I had given a description as I remembered.
There have been conspiracy theories around Kennedy's death, as it is hard to believe Oswald acted alone. Moreover, the former U.S. soldier who had defected to the Soviet Union was later shot to death by a nightclub owner 2 days after the assassination.
And unfortunately, when Oswald was killed, that started all the conspiracy theories, because it was too neat a package. Kennedy is killed. 48 hours later, the assassin is killed. And therefore, in the minds of a lot of people, there must have been some sort of pre-arrangement for that to occur to keep him from talking. The difficulty is for anyone, and I kind of have that same sense, but it's so hard to accept or believe that a Lee Oswald, a loser, a loner, someone so insignificant, so unsuccessful at everything he did, that this Oswald guy could have accomplished something so monumental, so earth-shaking as killing a president of the United States in broad daylight in his hometown alone. We don't want to believe that. And so immediately you say, he must have been the pawn of some vast network of financiers or planners or activists or whatever. And I don't think that will go away anytime soon. There's been no evidence to the contrary, but I suspect the myth will continue. And we'll never know. Unfortunately, the truth died with Oswald. If I hadn't left the studio and if I just heard about it later, I would have thought that's an incredible event. I'm sorry it took place in my hometown, but I would have been much more detached. It would have just been something horrific that occurred. The involvement becomes part of your life, even if you don't talk about it much. It's there, and you recognize it as being there. And when I come down to the 6th floor, when I stand on the corner again or think about it, it's forever 1963. everything is so vivid. It's as though it were yesterday.
Allman said this while sitting on the 7th floor of the depository building. The 6th and 7th floors have been renovated to a place of interest called the 6th Floor Museum in commemoration of the late president. Allman helped record the audio guide of the museum, which receives hundreds of thousands of visitors annually.
This is CNC World, a new perspective.